Daniel had never thought a simple journey through the stars would throw him into something so strange. His small transport ship, meant only for short hops between colonies, had sputtered and stalled near an unfamiliar world. Lights blinked red, systems failed, and he was forced to land on the nearest safe surface. The planet below shimmered with city lights, larger and brighter than anything he had seen before. He had no idea it was the capital of an alien empire. To him, it was only a place to seek help, to repair his ship, and perhaps to get food and water. When the hatch opened, Daniel stepped out carefully, holding his breath at the sight before him. The air was breathable, though it carried a strange, sweet fragrance, almost like flowers blooming in the night. Towers rose high into the sky, made of crystal-like stone that reflected the stars. Pathways glowed softly beneath his boots, guiding him like rivers of light. He followed the stream of people, though calling them people was perhaps too simple. They were tall, graceful beings, their skin faintly shimmering in colors of pale silver, deep violet, or soft blue. Their garments looked like flowing robes that carried streaks of light, as if woven from starlight itself. At first, Daniel thought he had stumbled into some sort of festival. Music drifted on the air, low and melodic, unlike anything human instruments could produce. Strange floating orbs hovered above the streets, glowing warmly and releasing faint trails of sparkling mist. Beings moved in groups, talking in gentle voices, laughing, carrying gifts wrapped in glowing cloths. Daniel, in his patched pilot's jacket and worn boots, felt like a shadow among a galaxy of stars. Yet no one stopped him. No one questioned his presence as he followed them deeper into the heart of the city. His steps carried him into a massive hall that looked like a palace carved from light. Archways opened into a space so vast it could have held his entire colony, ship. Golden banners stretched across the ceiling, etched with flowing alien symbols. Long tables curved in circles, covered in dishes that shimmered with liquid colors and fruits that glowed softly from within. At the far end stood a grand throne, set high upon steps of shining stone. There, seated with calm power, was a figure whose presence made Daniel freeze, the queen herself. She was taller than the rest, draped in robes of deep sapphire threaded with silver. A crown of crystal rested upon her brow, and her eyes, like twin stars, swept across the gathering with authority and grace. Even without understanding her words, Daniel knew she was not just a leader but something far greater, a ruler whose will shape the empire around her. And Daniel somehow had walked right into her daughter's wedding. He realized it too late. When the crowd bowed, he stood awkwardly at the back. When the bride, radiant in a gown of flowing white light, stepped forward, he clapped nervously, unsure of what else to do. A few heads turned. Whispers began to spread. The alien nobles, with their flawless robes and proud bearing, narrowed, their eyes at the odd figure standing among them. His human face and clumsy clothes so different from theirs. The air grew tense. Guards began to notice. Daniel's heart raced. He wanted to explain, wanted to tell them it was a mistake, that he had not come to intrude. But he could not speak their language. He had nothing but his presence, his nervous smile, and his respectful bow. So he bowed deeply, lowering his head, hoping that humility would speak louder than words. For a long moment, silence followed. Then a soft voice, powerful yet calm, echoed through the hall. The queen had spoken. Every alien turned back toward her, their expressions changing instantly from suspicion to obedience. Her gaze lingered on Daniel for a moment. Instead of anger, she showed something unexpected. Curiosity. She raised a hand, and the guards who had begun to move toward him halted at once. Whispers filled the hall again, but this time softer, more uncertain. The queen had chosen not to drive him away. Daniel felt his legs weaken with relief. He stepped back to the edge of the hall, blending into the shadows as much as he could. Yet he could not look away. The wedding continued, filled with songs that rose and fell like waves of the ocean, with vows spoken in tones so rich they seemed to vibrate in his chest. He did not understand the words, but he felt the meaning. the weight of love, family, and tradition. For all the strangeness, the heart of it was something humans knew well. He could see how important this moment was. The bride stood tall beside her partner, both glowing with pride and joy. Their hands were bound together with a ribbon of living light, a symbol Daniel guessed meant unity. The nobles cheered, lifting their hands as beams of light rose into the ceiling and burst into sparks like fireworks. It was beautiful. And Daniel, the accidental guest, could not believe he was standing in the middle of it. But beauty was not enough to erase the tension. He felt the weight of many eyes still upon him, sharp and doubtful. Some nobles whispered more fiercely now, their expressions hardened with offense. A few gestured toward him angrily, as though questioning the queen's choice to allow him to remain. Daniel's chest tightened. He did not want to cause trouble. He wished he could disappear, or at least slip quietly back to his ship. Yet the queen's decision had already marked him. His presence had become part of the ceremony, whether he wanted it or not. Time passed slowly, each second stretching like a test of his composure. He kept his head lowered, trying not to appear disrespectful. But when he risked a glance upward, his eyes met the queen's again. She was watching him. Her gaze was unreadable, yet it did not feel hostile. It felt like she was measuring him, considering something beyond the surface. For the first time, Daniel wondered if she saw more than just a lost human. Perhaps in her eyes, his arrival was no accident. The ceremony ended with a grand chorus of voices and a wave of glowing petals that fell from above. Guests rose to their feet, applauding, cheering, some embracing the bride and her partner. Daniel, swept up by the energy, clapped again, though awkwardly. He felt both small and honored, an outsider allowed a glimpse into something sacred. Whatever happened next, he knew this night would stay with him forever. Yet the night was far from over. The queen stood from her throne, her robe flowing like a river of stars. She spoke once more, and the crowd grew quiet. Her voice carried through the hall, calm yet commanding. And though Daniel could not understand her words, he felt the power behind them. The queen was not finished with him. Not yet. Daniel's accidental step into this alien wedding was only the beginning of something greater, though he had no idea what awaited him next. Daniel's heart still pounded long after the main ceremony ended. He had survived standing among nobles and guards, survived the moment when all eyes had turned to him. He thought perhaps now he could slip quietly away, back to the glowing streets, outside, and find his way to his broken ship. But he was wrong. Instead of ending, the event seemed to shift into something new. The giant hall transformed into a place of feasting and gathering. Long tables filled with shimmering dishes unfolded like living streams, sliding smoothly into place. Alien attendants carried trays of crystalline cups that glowed faintly. The guests moved gracefully to their seats, forming circles around the center space where glowing orbs now floated higher, casting warm light across the hall. Daniel stood still at the edge, uncertain what to do. He didn't belong here. He had no seat, no gift, no fine robes to mark his status. He expected the guards to finally step in and escort him out. But instead, to his shock, a tall attendant with pale silver skin approached him. The being did not speak but gestured politely, motioning for him to follow. Daniel hesitated, but refusing felt dangerous. With careful steps, he followed the attendant through rows of nobles who whispered and watched. At last, they stopped at a seat near the center, not far from the queen herself. Daniel froze. He wanted to protest, but the attendant bowed and withdrew, leaving him there as if he truly belonged. He sat stiffly, his eyes darting around. The nobles at his table were magnificent in their robes of light. Their eyes shimmered in colors of gold and violet. Some ignored him, others openly studied him, their expressions a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. He felt like an animal displayed in a cage, something rare, something strange, something not fully welcome. The food before him looked like a dream. Dishes held fruits that glowed softly, steaming breads that changed color as they cooled, and liquids that shimmered like melted jewels. Daniel's stomach growled, but he did not dare touch anything. He folded his hands and kept them on his lap, trying to appear respectful. One of the nobles leaned closer, his voice sharp and cold. Daniel could not understand the words, but the tone was clear. A challenge, maybe even an insult. Another noble responded, this one softer, her expression thoughtful. Soon others joined, their voices weaving into a discussion clearly about him. Their eyes kept sliding toward Daniel, some narrowing, others widening with interest. Daniel sat frozen. He wished desperately that he could speak their language. He wanted to explain he had not meant to intrude, that he had arrived here only by accident. But all he could do was bow his head and remain silent. He had never felt so powerless, yet he refused to show fear. Instead, he sat tall, even if his heart trembled. Then, a hush swept through the hall. The queen had risen again. Her robes shimmered as she raised her hand, silencing the nobles' murmurs. Slowly, she descended the steps from her throne. Every gaze followed her, and Daniel's breath caught as she walked closer. He lowered his eyes, unsure if he should look directly at her. She stopped before his table. For a moment, silence stretched, like eternity. Then she spoke, her voice calm but strong. He could not understand the words, but something in her tone was different from the noble's sharpness. It was not scorn, it was curiosity, perhaps even kindness. When she finished, she turned to the hall. Her words rolled across the air, and the nobles responded with mixed reactions. Some nodded in agreement, others frowned or shook their heads. Daniel could feel the tension. She had defended him. He was certain of it. The queen's eyes lingered on him one last time. Then she returned to her throne. Daniel released a shaky breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The nobles at his table no longer spoke to him with scorn, though their gazes remained sharp. The queen's choice to protect him had shifted something, though not everyone agreed with her. The feast continued. Musicians appeared, playing instruments that floated in the air, strings glowing as unseen hands drew across them. The music was unlike anything Daniel had ever heard, soft yet powerful, weaving through the hall like a living river. Some guests began to rise, moving with graceful steps, performing dances that seemed as ancient as the empire itself. Daniel watched, entranced. He had seen human weddings before with laughter, music, and dancing, but this was on a scale beyond imagination. The aliens moved in flowing patterns, their robes glowing brighter with each step, creating shapes and waves of light as they danced. It was mesmerizing, and for a moment Daniel forgot his fear. Yet even in wonder he felt the weight of his presence. He could see nobles whispering, pointing discreetly in his direction. He felt eyes on him no matter where he turned. To them, he was no longer just a stranger, he was a disruption. Some feared him, some mocked him, and some seemed strangely fascinated. Daniel knew one thing for certain. He could not remain invisible any longer. His presence was already part of their story. The queen had made sure of that. As the night stretched, Daniel's nerves slowly gave way to something else, a spark of curiosity. He began to study the nobles more closely. He noticed patterns in their gestures, the way they bowed their heads or touched their hearts when speaking of something serious. He noticed how they raised their hands toward the ceiling when cheering, as if calling the stars themselves to bear witness. He could not understand their language, but he could feel the rhythm of their culture. When the bride passed near his table, Daniel rose to his feet and bowed deeply. She paused, surprised, then smiled, a gentle, genuine smile. She touched her hand to her heart in what seemed like gratitude. Daniel, uncertain, mirrored her gesture. The guests nearby murmured in surprise. It was a small moment, but it was enough. He had shown respect and she had acknowledged it. The queen saw the exchange from her throne. Her expression softened, almost like pride. Daniel sat again, his heart racing, but for the first time since stepping into the hall, he felt a little less alone. Perhaps, he thought, he could survive this strange night. Perhaps he could even leave, behind something more than fear. But deep inside, he knew this was only the beginning. Something larger was unfolding, something he could not yet understand. The queen's eyes had not left him for long. She had seen something in him. And whatever it was, it would change everything that followed. The feast carried on, and Daniel thought the night had reached its height. He had seen the ceremony, tasted the music, and felt the weight of being noticed by a queen. He believed perhaps the rest of the evening would pass quietly, with him sitting, politely waiting for a chance to slip away. But the universe had other plans. The hall grew brighter as the musicians shifted into a new melody. The glowing orbs above the guests swirled higher, casting soft waves of golden light across the hall. The guests rose in groups, their robes catching the glow, turning them into living rivers of color. This was no ordinary dance. It was something ceremonial, something sacred. The dancers moved in sweeping arcs, every step deliberate. Their movements wove patterns across the floor, light trailing from their garments in glowing ribbons. Daniel sat mesmerized. It was beautiful, like watching constellations come alive, as if the stars themselves had descended to move among them. He leaned forward, captivated, forgetting for a moment his unease. But then the music shifted again. The dancers slowed, pausing, in unison. A single drumbeat echoed through the hall. All eyes turned upward. The queen was rising from her throne. Daniel's heart skipped. She stepped gracefully down from her elevated seat, her long robe of sapphire and silver flowing behind her. The crowd bowed as she passed. Her crown caught the light, scattering rainbows across the walls. She moved with dignity, yet her gaze was not distant. Her eyes were searching, fixed ahead as if she already knew her destination. And then she stopped. She stood directly before Daniel's table. The hall fell silent. Nobles froze, their robes stilling, their whispers cut short. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. He looked up slowly, his chest tight, and met her gaze. Her eyes, like twin stars, shone not with anger but with an intensity that pierced him. The queen extended her hand. Daniel blinked, certain he was imagining it. But no, her hand, slender and glowing faintly with the shimmer of her kind, remained steady, open before him. Her voice rose, calm yet commanding. He did not understand the words, but the meaning was clear. She was inviting him to dance. Shock rippled through the hall. Nobles gasped. Some covered their mouths. Others whispered sharply to each other. "You." Bride herself turned, her eyes wide with disbelief. Never before had a queen lowered herself to invite an outsider, much less a human, to share in a sacred dance. Daniel's mind raced. He wanted to refuse, to hide, to vanish. He could not dance like them. He did not know their steps, their customs, their meaning. To accept would be to risk shame, both for himself and possibly for her. To refuse might insult her deeply. His throat went dry. But then he saw her eyes, calm, patient, steady. She was giving him a choice, yet her gaze told him that this moment mattered. It was more than a dance, it was a test. With shaking hands, Daniel stood. He bowed deeply, his voice silent but his gesture clear. Respect. Then, trembling, he placed his hand in hers. The hall erupted in whispers. The queen guided him gently toward the center of the floor. The nobles parted, creating space. The music swelled again, soft but steady, waiting for them to begin. Daniel's pulse thundered in his ears. He tried to steady his breathing, tried to remind himself he had faced storms in space, hunger on colonies, and the loneliness of the void. Surely he could survive a dance. The queen lifted her hand, guiding his arm. She moved with grace, her steps flowing like water. Daniel, in contrast, stumbled at first. His boots scuffed awkwardly against the glowing floor. He stepped left when she stepped right, nearly bumping into her. Gasps echoed through the crowd. Heat flooded his face, but the queen only smiled. She adjusted her steps, slowing slightly, as if to match his rhythm. Her hand remained firm yet gentle, guiding him without force. She moved again, and this time Daniel tried to follow more carefully. He mimicked her flow, awkwardly at first, but with growing awareness. Step by step he found a rhythm, not perfect, not graceful, but honest. The music lifted, faster now. The queen spun lightly, her robe sweeping in arcs of silver light. Daniel moved clumsily to match, nearly losing his balance. Yet when he caught himself and continued, the hall erupted, not with laughter but with surprised murmurs. He was still standing. He had not given up. Daniel felt a strange spark within him. The fear that had gripped him began to loosen. He realized something. This was not about skill, it was about courage. The queen had chosen him not because he knew the dance, but because she wanted to see if he would try. So he tried. He lifted his arms, followed her spin, took steps that felt unnatural but bold. He even dared a turn of his own, clumsy but determined. The queen laughed softly, her voice like chimes in the wind. For the first time that night, Daniel smiled. The hall watched in stunned silence as the human danced with their queen. Some nobles frowned, shaking their heads. Others leaned forward, eyes wide with fascination. The bride smiled faintly, as if amused by the unlikely scene. And through it all, the queen danced with grace, her every movement a shield for Daniel's awkwardness, turning his clumsy steps into something that looked, almost, like belonging. The music swelled toward its peak. Daniel, breathless and sweating, kept moving. His feet hurt, his heart raced, but he refused to stop. He looked at the queen, and she looked back with approval. Not mockery, not pity, approval. The final note rang out, echoing like a star exploding in silence. The dancers froze in their last poses. Daniel, panting, lowered his head, bowing deeply to the queen. For a moment, the hall remained still. Then slowly, applause began. It started with a few hands, hesitant claps. Then more joined, until the hall was filled with sound. Some clapped reluctantly, others with true excitement. But they all clapped. The queen lifted Daniel's hand high as though declaring him worthy. Daniel could barely believe it. He, a lost human who had stumbled into the wrong place, had just danced with an alien queen before an empire. And though his steps had been clumsy, his courage had spoken louder than any words. The applause still echoed in Daniel's ears long after the dance ended. He stood beside the queen, breathless and sweating, unsure if he should bow again or vanish into the shadows. His chest rose and fell quickly, but his heart felt lighter than it had all night. He had survived. He had done what no human had ever done. He had danced with an alien queen. The queen released his hand gently and returned to her throne. The music shifted into a softer rhythm, and the other guests began to dance again, filling the hall with flowing patterns of light. Daniel stepped back toward his table, grateful for the chance to sit down. But as soon as he lowered himself onto the seat, he realized the hall had changed. Before, whispers had been suspicious and sharp, full of doubt about his presence. Now they were different. The nobles looked at him with new eyes. Some were still hostile, frowning with tight jaws, but others seemed almost curious. Their voices wove through the air like threads, and though Daniel could not understand their words, he could feel the shift. He had become more than an intruder. He had become a symbol. The noble to his right leaned close, his golden eyes narrowed. His words came out low and sharp, like a warning. Daniel could not understand, but the tone made him tense. The noble's robe glittered with threads of crimson light, marking him as someone of high rank. His expression carried both suspicion and challenge. Another noble across the table responded, her tone lighter, her smile faint but warm. She gestured toward Daniel and mimicked a clumsy dance step, then tapped her chest. The table chuckled softly. Daniel's face burned, unsure if they mocked him or admired his bravery. As the whispers spread, the bride herself passed near his table again. She paused, her white gown shimmering as though woven from moonlight. Her eyes met Daniel's and she smiled gently. She placed her hand over her heart, a gesture of gratitude. Though no words passed between them, Daniel understood. She was thanking him for easing the tension, for bringing laughter and wonder into her wedding. That small gesture filled him with courage. He bowed back, hand pressed to his chest. The bride's smile widened before she moved on. The nobles nearby murmured again, some in surprise, some in approval, but not all were pleased. Daniel felt it in the way certain nobles glared at him, their eyes hard as steel. A group near the far end of the hall spoke in hushed, angry tones, gesturing toward him. One even slammed his hand against the table, his expression fierce. Their hostility was clear. They did not see him as a guest, but as a threat to their traditions. Daniel's stomach tightened. He had not come here to disrupt their world. He only wanted to survive the night, repair his ship, and leave quietly. But now it seemed fate had other ideas. The queen's gaze found him again from her throne. She watched silently as if she could read every thought in his mind. Her expression was calm, but there was a weight behind her eyes, as though she understood what her invitation had unleashed. Later, when the dancing slowed and the guests returned to their seats, the queen rose once more. She spoke, her voice, strong and steady, filling the hall. The nobles listened, some nodding, others stiffening. She gestured toward Daniel, and every head turned his way. His stomach clenched. Though he could not understand her words, he understood their effect. The queen was speaking about him. She was framing his presence not as an accident, but as something meaningful. Some nobles applauded, their robes shimmering as they raised their hands toward the ceiling. Others remained cold, their faces like carved stone. When she finished, the hall erupted in divided voices, some excited, some angry, all charged with energy. Daniel sat frozen, unsure what to do. His presence, once a mistake, had become a subject of debate. As the night went on, the whispers only grew. Servants passed near him, speaking in hurried tones. Nobles leaned across tables, arguing in voices that rose higher than before. The words meant nothing to Daniel, but the way they pointed, the way they gestured, the way their eyes kept flicking toward him, it was clear. He had become a question none of them knew how to answer. A servant approached his table, setting down a glowing cup of liquid before him. The servant's expression was kind, almost protective. Daniel raised the cup politely, though he only pretended to sip. He was not sure if he could trust the drink, but he appreciated the gesture. As he set the cup down, the noble in crimson leaned closer again. His voice was low, and his eyes sharp. He spoke slowly, deliberately, as if daring Daniel to understand. Daniel felt the challenge in his tone. Though he could not reply with words, he straightened his back, meeting the noble's gaze without flinching. The silence between them was heavy. Then the noble smirked faintly, leaning back in his seat. Daniel's pulse raced. He had no weapons, no allies, no way to defend himself if things turned violent. But he had something else, something that had carried him through every hardship before: resilience. He might not know their language or their customs, but he knew how to stand his ground. Later, as the feast neared its end, the queen summoned the bride and her partner forward. The hall cheered as gifts were exchanged, blessings spoken and vows sealed. Yet even in this grand moment, Daniel could feel eyes lingering on him. His dance had woven him into their story, whether he wished it or not. When the ceremony ended, guests began to leave the hall, flowing back into the glowing streets of the city. Some nobles paused near him, offering curious looks. A few even gave faint nods as if acknowledging his courage. Others turned away coldly, refusing to see him at all. Daniel remained seated, uncertain if he should follow. But then a soft voice spoke at his side. It was the bride. She had returned, her expression gentle. She placed her hand over her heart again, then gestured toward him, her eyes kind. Though he could not understand the words that followed, the meaning was clear enough. She was grateful. Daniel bowed deeply, touched more than he could say. When she left, Daniel sat back, staring at the empty cup before him. He realized the night had changed him. He had arrived as an outsider, lost and unwanted. Now he had become part of something larger, a story that belonged not just to him but to an entire empire, but he also understood the danger. Whispers of destiny could lift him high, but they could also drag him down. The queen had chosen him, but many nobles had not. Some would never forgive what they saw as an insult to their traditions, and as Daniel looked once more toward the queen, who was now surrounded by her closest attendants, he knew one thing with certainty: his journey was far from over. What had begun as an accident was shaping into a destiny he had never sought. The wedding hall was quieter now. Many guests had left for the glowing streets outside, their laughter and voices fading into the night. Only a smaller circle of nobles and attendants remained, gathered near the queen and the newly married couple. The air felt different. Less like celebration, more like something heavy was about to be decided. Daniel sat still at his table, unsure if he should move or stay. His heart told him to slip away quietly, but his instincts warned him that the queen was not finished with him. He could still feel the weight of eyes on him, some curious, some suspicious, a few openly hostile. He was no longer invisible. His dance had made sure of that. The queen rose from her throne. Her sapphire robe shimmered with threads of silver, and the crystal crown glowed faintly in the soft light. She lifted her hand and silence fell across the hall. Even those whispering nobles near the edges grew still. All attention turned toward her. She began to speak. Her voice was steady, rich with authority, carrying across the hall with a calm power. Daniel could not understand her words, but he felt their weight. Every syllable carried meaning, as though history itself was being written in that moment. Then she extended her hand toward him. The hall turned. Dozens of alien eyes locked on Daniel. His chest tightened, but he stood slowly, bowing his head in respect. The queen's gaze was steady, her expression unreadable, but he felt no anger. Instead, there was something else, something almost protective. Her voice carried on, and though the words were strange, Daniel could sense what she was saying. She was speaking of him, not as an intruder, not as a mistake, but as something more. She gestured to him, then to the sky above, then to the gathered nobles. Her tone was firm, commanding, not inviting debate. When she finished, she lifted a small emblem from the arm of her throne. It glowed softly, shaped like a star surrounded by two curved lines. She stepped forward, descending from the throne, and placed it gently in Daniel's hands. The hall gasped. Daniel stared at the emblem, his fingers trembling. He did not know its meaning, but he knew its importance. The queen had given him something sacred, something that marked him as more than a lost traveler. The queen turned back to the hall and raised her hand. Her words rang clear, and this time, the meaning reached even Daniel's heart. She was declaring him an honored guest of the empire. Some nobles applauded, their hands striking together in rhythm. Their robes shimmered brighter, showing approval. Others remained still, their jaws tight, their eyes dark with disapproval. Yet none dared to speak against her. The queen's will was final. Daniel's breath shook as he bowed deeply, clutching the emblem to his chest. He did not deserve this honor. He had not come here to change anything. But now, his presence had become a bridge between two worlds. When the applause faded, the queen spoke to him again, softer now. He could not understand her words, but he caught the faintest smile at the edge of her lips. Then she turned away, signaling the end of the gathering. The guests began to leave, though not without more glances at Daniel. Some offered respectful nods, others cold stares. A few whispered, pointing toward the emblem in his hands. He could tell they would carry this story far beyond the walls of the hall. As the crowd thinned, Daniel remained where he was, still clutching the glowing emblem. His thoughts swirled. Hours ago, he had been a simple traveler looking for help. Now he was carrying the mark of a queen. The bride passed near him once more, her partner at her side. She paused, smiled warmly, and bowed her head to him. Her gesture carried no words, yet it said enough: gratitude and respect. Daniel returned the bow, touched by her kindness. Finally, attendants guided him gently toward the great doors of the hall. Outside, the city was still alive with light. Towers shimmered in the night sky, and glowing pathways stretched endlessly. The sweet fragrance of the air filled his lungs, yet everything felt different now. He was no longer a lost stranger. He was a symbol. He walked through the streets, the emblem still glowing faintly in his hand. Some citizens noticed it, their eyes widening in recognition. Murmurs spread quickly. Everywhere he went, whispers followed. The human who had danced with the queen. As he reached the quiet edge of the city where his small ship rested, Daniel stopped and looked back. The grand palace rose high in the distance, its crystal walls reflecting starlight. Somewhere inside, the queen sat on her throne, calm and steady as the universe itself. He knew he would never forget her gaze. Daniel entered his ship, placing the emblem carefully on the console. His hands moved across the controls, testing the repairs he had made earlier. The systems flickered to life, weak but functional. The engines hummed softly. He could leave now if he wished, but as he sat in the pilot's seat staring at the glowing emblem, he felt a strange weight in his chest. He had come here by accident, but he would leave carrying a story that could not be erased. He had been accepted, even if only for one night, as part of something larger than himself. When future travelers asked about the alien empire, he would not speak of fear or hostility. He would speak of light-filled halls, of music that flowed like rivers, of robes that shimmered like stars. He would speak of a queen who saw beyond differences and extended her hand not to her own kind, but to a human stranger. Daniel smiled, faintly. He had not meant to attend a wedding, yet he had left a mark on history. As his ship lifted from the ground, rising into the night sky, he whispered softly to himself, "The universe brings together those it chooses." And somewhere, far behind him, the queen surely knew the same.